Welcome to the latest edition of Russia Unmasked. It's from the Center for Russian Studies in Kiev, and during this podcast we will challenge the propaganda published by the Kremlin against Ukraine, NATO and the European Union, or the West if you like, and share with you Ukrainian perspectives. My name is Tony Meehan, I'm based in London, and Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, as you know, has been going on for more than 1,345 days. We're coming up to 4 years in a short time. In 2014, my colleague from the centre in Kiev, Dr. Denis Bohus, wrote an academic paper entitled Putin's Russia. In this paper, he analysed Putin's techniques of establishing and maintaining control over Russia, its military, its 135 million citizens, the political systems, economy, and everything else that makes Russia work. In short, during his 20-plus years, Putin has used propaganda every single day. He first told them that Russia needs one strong leader, portraying Russia as the victim, which he continues to do, which only he could protect Russia, and then therefore after, Russia need Putin. So Putin was Russia. And that's the simple synology of it all. The same is true today. The reason for this introduction is so that we have 3 outstanding, 4 outstanding, 5 outstanding examples of Putin's propaganda at work. Putin boasts new nuclear weapon amid Western sanctions. So the West put sanctions on. Putin's response is, I've got an invincible weapon, and it is basically a psychological pressure on the West. Putin's envoys around the world, one in particular, believes that war in Ukraine could end within a year and that Russia should be considered as the peacemakers. More propaganda. Belarusian leader, who is a close ally of Putin, has requested new missiles from Russia just in case he has to fire them down south. Guess where down south is? Ukraine. Correct. Ukraine's defense intelligence is working to stabilize areas in the occupied zones to ensure that we tell the truth. Russia claims that troops have been wiped out. We can prove they were not. And finally, Czech Foreign Minister reminds Russian diplomats who really backed fascism in the late 1930s. Yes, Stalin, but we'll get on to that later. So if you take Putin's start on the sanctions, he's saying, I don't care. I have new range of weapons. Be careful what you wish for. I can test them on you as much as anybody else. So Kremlin ruler Vladimir Putin, at a meeting with participants in the war against Ukraine, which is interesting, the war against Ukraine, boasted that Russia has tested the Poseidon underwater system, which is equipped with a nuclear power unit, claiming it has no analogues in the world and cannot be intercepted. We shall see. Putin, reported by Kremlin-aligned Russian news agency TASS, said yesterday we conducted tests of another advanced system, the unmanned water vehicle Poseidon. Very good. Putin told his military audience this is important to them, for them being the West, NATO and everybody else who's interested, as they are fighting on the front against Ukraine and wondering what and how they're fighting for, how prepared Russia will be to carry on the work in the course of the invasion. Now, one can say, well, are they talking about them or are they talking about us? Never know. Anyway, there's one thing about Putin is that you never know really what he's saying, even though he does very clearly. He also mentioned he has a nuclear-powered cruise missile of unlimited range. Video tests said he reported on the 26th of October. Very good. Putin's invisible weapon threats are attempts at psychological pressure on the West. Now, in Ukraine, there is a Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security Defense Council. And that group have assessed the statements by Putin about testing nuclear-powered submarine, etc., as being purely an attempt to assert psychological pressure on the West. On October the 29th, Putin boasted to Russian forces that Russia had conducted tests of the Poseidon underwater complex, allegedly equipped with a nuclear power unit, supposedly impossible to intercept, etc., etc. The CCD emphasized that Kremlin's threats are a reaction to the growing isolation, the economic pressure, and the fear of inevitable consequences of its own aggression. So therefore, they're waking up to the reality of their situation, that the sanctions are having an impact, that they will impact on the average man in the street, and what will happen then. I mean, you only have to recall a few weeks ago, there was a demonstration in St. Petersburg against, not necessarily against the war, but against the Putin regime. Wonder if that grows any further. Putin's scare stories about his invincible weapons are an attempt to put pressure on the West. Moscow is trying to intimidate Ukraine's allies, particularly the United States, to slow down military assistance and force the world to accept conditions for ending the war that favor Russia. Don't think it's going to happen. The West recognized the bluff, and by recognizing the psychological game of the master puppeteer was playing, Belgian Foreign Minister Theo Franken responded with a simple statement. Moscow would disappear if he attacked NATO. Interestingly, the Russian embassy in Belgium responded quickly with a statement describing Franken's words as provocative and irresponsible. Franken's adventurism is regrettable and an embodiment of militarist deviation that is gaining even more momentum in the European party of war. The interesting point about this particular statement is that they immediately accuse Europe, whether that's NATO, whether that's EU, or whether that's the West, as being the party of war, conveniently forgetting, once again, that Russia started the war in Ukraine, and therefore, how can they be possibly perceived to be the peacemakers, which they could actually stop the war in a moment? It's typical Russian fashion. Accuse your enemy of the crimes you have or committed or are about to commit. Think about that. Kirill Dmitriev may be a name known to you or not known to you, but he is a special envoy of Vladimir Putin. And he recently did a tour of the United States where he gave forth with many lies. And recently, speaking at an investment conference in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and reported by Reuters, he said he believes that the Russia-Ukrainian war could end within a year, and called Russian peacemakers. Now, we all know that Putin is the master of the doublespeak and the triple tongue. No matter what he says, he means something completely different, and always has deniability. He makes unjustifiable claims of innocence and positions and assumes the role which his actions contradict. It is that traditional old-fashioned statement, listen not to what I say, but watch what I do, and then you'll find out where the truth is. Through one of his many voice pieces, namely Dear Kirill, Dmitriev, positions Putin, thereby Russia, as the peacemaker. I quote this, "We are sure that we are on the road to peace, and as peacemakers, we need to make it happen." Now, this is Russia speaking. He states we, Russia, and Putin are peacemakers, forgetting Putin and therefore Russia started the war in Ukraine. When asked whether peace in Ukraine is possible within a year, he said, I believe so. People right now are focused on the regional conflict that exists around Russia. But we do not wish to escalate it into a bigger conflict. And for that, we have to do better than we have been doing, not worse. So that does mean more violence, more pressure, more aggravation, more killing, more hurt, more suffering, probably. The regional conflict around Russia is not around Russia. It's actually in Ukraine. And as I've said previously, was started by Russia. He then says, we do not want to escalate it. Now, that is a threat, saying that he and we, i.e. Russia, have the ability to escalate it. So unless you give us what we want, watch out, because you will be very, very regretful. He also called for cooperation between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia as the world's largest holders of natural resources, claiming such collaboration would make the world safer. If they chose to ignore the offer, they will be responsible for what happens. No, Russia would be responsible for what happens should Russia decide to take further aggravation and escalate the war. This is classic Putin, of course. He also called for cooperation and amongst others, but we won't bother going there. So the peacemakers then follow up with the following announcement. Belarusian leader warns that he may use Russian missiles if things go south. Now, the term "if things go south" relates to Ukraine, because guess which country is immediately south of Belarus? Yes, absolutely, or Belarus, I should say, and that is Ukraine. The self-proclaimed Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, he grabs at Russian lies and playing the victim to justify new weapons as a self-proclaimed self-defense against an imaginary military threat by NATO, the West, or Ukraine. He says he needs the new Russian missiles to intimidate neighboring states, and these would be put on combat duty in December. These are the peacemakers. Lukashenko said it would enable Belarus to avoid Ukraine's fate. The opportunity of Belarus becoming part of Ukraine's fate is unlikely, given the fact he's an ally of Russia. But anyway, the war in Ukraine began with this. This is another classic Russian lie. In Donbass, Russian speakers were oppressed, killed, and persecuted. I saw it with my own eyes. Now, the two aspects of that lie is, one, they weren't, and two, he never saw anything with his own eyes relative to that. Why? I want them, thus his opponents abroad, to know we can slap them down if things go south. Ukraine is immediately south of Belarus. So, we'll sit down with Putin, decide what we're going to do, and then slap them down. Further threats, not peace. He then reflected on the Minsk agreements, which he claimed the Western Ukraine used to deceive Russia and us. I haven't got the time to go through that. That's the international feedback. They're also using psychological warfare at a local level too. On November, Russia's defense ministry claimed that Russian forces had repelled an operation by DIU, that's Ukraine's Special Services, that landed in an area, a controlled area, and that all 11 personnel were killed. Not true. Source told Ukrainska Pravda that reports of a Ukrainian landing and the group being wiped out are false, adding that stabilization measures led by head Kirill Budanov are going on in the designated area of Pokrovsk. This is part of Ukraine's defense program to recapture lost ground. But anyway, the information is just as false as Russian Chief of Staff General Valery Gerasimov's report to Vladimir Putin a few days ago that told Putin the area was encircled. It wasn't. So I'm pleased to close this edition of Russia Unmasked with a truth story from Czechia, where the Czech Foreign Ministry reminded Russian diplomats who really backed fascism. In response to the latest propaganda post from Russia's foreign ministry, in which it accused the UK of supporting fascism because of its support for Ukraine. It appeared on the official X account of the Russian Foreign Ministry and quotes its spokesperson Maria Zakharova as saying, "The goals of the Russian phobes in the UK and their inhuman methods remain the same." Zakharova accused London of supplying Nazis, that's Ukraine, with explosives and weapons, sponsoring killing and terror acts and intimidating civilians. Remember what I said earlier, accuse your enemies of the acts that you do yourselves. Czechia's foreign ministry replied from its official account, "Is your memory failing you, comrades? It is the Kremlin supporting fascists worldwide since 1939. In its next tweet, Prague reminded Moscow of the joint military parade that Soviet troops and the Wehrmacht held in Brest after the dismemberment of Poland in 1939. Says it all, really, doesn't it? Anyway, thank you for your attention. I hope you found it to be of interest. From all of us at the Centre, thank you. Share this with your friends and those who you think will be interested. The online address is Russia Unmasked. We'll be back soon with more news from Kiev. Until then, Slav Ukraini. And in the words of President Zelensky, Ukrainians were, are, and always will be here.